This is the world that I've been working on. Specifically, this is the center of the world that I've been working on. You can see there's a lot of room still to grow and lots of things still to be added, but this is the Kingdom of Rain, and it follows the where you see these red text markers. So the black text are separate countries, separate kingdoms, I should say. But for today's video, what I really wanted to do was focus on how to make better borders, because I've seen lots of maps where the borders just don't feel realistic, and I really have to say that when I look at the before and after, I had a vague idea of where I wanted these countries to be as I'm building out this document that I'm putting together on my world, sort of a how to play in Maladea. But as I'm putting this document together, I've been forced to draw in more detail what these countries look like to me in my head. And so I had an idea of where the countries are, where they exist on the map, but I didn't have clear defined borders in my head. I had an understanding that this was a forest city, that this was a country that lived on the plains, this was a country of the mountains. But until I placed these names physically on the map, and then I drew the rivers, it really changed, because it originally looked like this. And you can see that, like, it's very vague. I know that there's mountains. I know that where the ocean is to the east, and where the ocean is to the south, and that there's mountains to the west, and beyond that there's more ocean. But I didn't really fully understand where things were in my world, where the forests were, and that's sort of the whole point of this video series, is that I'm trying to put these together so that I am forced to think about those things. So the last section that I added were these rivers, and I had a whole video on how to make the rivers. And as the next step, I wanted to really focus on these 11 kingdoms here in the center, and I really wanted to define them. I wanted them to be a real visualized map of what this kingdom looked like. And in order to do that, you really have to have a better understanding of what your borders, how your borders form, how borders form in general in the world. And so I think it's come down to a few things, right? One of the things is that the path of least resistance is always going to be the most favorable. Kingdoms spring up, settlements spring up where there are resources, because it means that they have to travel. They don't have to travel very far in order to get the things that they need. And then there are natural barriers. So things like oceans, rivers, mountains that stop armies in their place. If they can't cross something, they're going to stop moving in that direction. It's just natural, right? So you really want to use these natural barriers and these locations of these resources as places where you're going to, as places on the map where you're going to plop down borders and cities. So that's what I've done here. Is when I was looking at sort of the layout of the cities and where I was going to place these cities, I knew, like, for example, Rossum I knew was here. I've known that for a while just because I've played games there. But when I'm looking at the country as a whole, I knew that Velen was going to be a city of the mountains because of the mines. But it wasn't until I really placed down the rivers that I realized that Velen probably would be near a mine, but near an access point for trade in order to access this massive river. So you really have to stop looking at regions in isolation. If you want to make realistic borders, you have to start looking at the continent, the kingdom, the interconnected ecosystems. You really want to look at that and see how would that inform your decisions. So, like, you can see here that this mountain range separates Portal. It creates an entirely separate area that almost feels like its own kingdom, and in the history of the world eventually does become its own kingdom. At least I think so anyways, right? Portal will be much larger than a lot of these other kingdoms here because of just the sheer open area that they have access to. But when you look at this here, for example, so Portal here, and you've got Ilarum over here, I think that how far do I want it to extend? Does Ilarum extend farther into Portal's territory? Does Portal extend farther into Ilarum's territory? Where do you draw that border between the two? And I really wanted to make Portal feel grander, feel like it was in some ways standing up to the might of the larger kingdom. But because it's part of this larger kingdom, it probably has a lot more influence and pushes this way because this country doesn't want to go to war with this larger country. So these are all things that I was thinking about when making the map. As I was saying, rivers make great borders because they are easy to define. If two countries are at war with each other, it's easy to say, well, you stay on your side of the river, I stay on my side. But they're also trade highways that a single kingdom is going to covet. They're going to want to control that. If you can control a river, you have access to a new type of trade. If you have control to an ocean, you have a new type of trade. So you might want to split borders where you have access point to the sea. Then that also becomes a point of contention because one kingdom might want that access point so that they control all of it and not half of it. So I guess the next part here is to just show you what I came up with. And I think that this does a really good job of just creating a feeling of like a clearly defined kingdom where, like, I didn't even mean to make the river have a point right here, but I like that the river naturally created this sort of weird shape. I don't even want to know what people are going to say about this in the comments. I like that it created that, and I'm keeping it. Because I really do like that it created this sort of wonky border, that the city or the country of Dodric has this sort of region where maybe it wants access across here, and so that's where these two go to war. And I like that, especially that you have these sort of natural borders between one country and another. That, again, going back to that idea that rivers are sort of natural borders because they're easily defined within treaties, right? So this country of Nidora that is historically at war with this country here, they keep to their side of the river and things stay hunky-dory. Now, the only thing that I do want to sort of add here is that I know that by adding the biomes, which is sort of the next step for me here, once I add these biomes in and I start thinking about where the deserts are going to be, where the forests are going to be, those are all going to naturally disrupt the borders of these nations because those are going to be new points of reference for me to decide where I want borders to be. So a desert might create this massive no man's land where the borders sort of blur, and I'm thinking that a lot of those areas are going to be areas like this, but I do have to take into consideration where my biomes are. I have a whole video on biomes if you want to check that out for yourself. So I guess really this whole video, I wanted to keep it shorter because I just wanted to sort of show off with you guys. I think you guys would appreciate what I've been working on, and really just wanted to get your advice, where you see things maybe a little strangely. I know that there's probably people who are experts in history. I am not an expert in history, but let me know what you think in the comments down below. What do you think of the 11 kingdoms? What questions do you have about them? Do you see borders shifting in one direction or another? I just want you to poke at it a little bit. Let me know in the comments down below. Really, really appreciate you guys taking a look here. We'll keep this Monday's video a little shorter than the others, and let me know if you like this type of deep dive into my videos, if you want to see more videos like this where it's not so heavily scripted and more just focused on my ideas or whatever. So let me know in the comments down below. Really appreciate you guys watching. As always, for John, my friends, and remember, stay on your side of the river.